Peace on the ranch. The morning sun stretched over the Texas horizon, spilling gold over the cedar trees and the still, glassy surface of Malik Dawson's lake. The air was cool with dew and smelled of mesquite and wet earth. A hawk circled lazily above the treetops while Malik stood barefoot on the wooden dock, coffee mug in hand, watching a turtle plop into the water. It was a rhythm he cherished: silence, sunrise, and solitude. Out here, 40 acres of inherited land gave him more peace than his 10 years in the military ever had. He didn't need much to be happy: a restored log cabin, a few goats, 2 fishing kayaks, and his lake, Lake Dawson, as it was officially recorded on the deed, though no one in the nearby HOA neighborhood ever called it that. They just called it the lake. The land had belonged to Malik's grandfather, a black cattleman who had bought it back in the 1960s, back when banks didn't lend to black ranchers and most neighbors had sundown warnings coded into their smiles. But Granddad had found a way, building up the land with sweat and stubbornness, and when he passed, Malik inherited every acre. Now in his late 30s, Malik had left the army with scars no one could see and wanted nothing more than peace. No ranks, no drills, no sirens, just quiet. And the land gave him that. He'd wake with the sun, mend fences, fish in the afternoons, teach local teens to pitch tents and build fires on weekends. He wasn't rich, but he lived well. Simple. Clean. Just past the southern tree line, though, the view shifted. That was where the HOA development began, all vinyl siding and manicured driveways. It was called Cedar Hills Estates, a planned community of about 40 families, mostly white, mostly conservative, and mostly unaware that the lake they claimed in their brochures technically sat on land not part of their jurisdiction. The boundary had been contested once decades ago. Malik's grandfather had the documents, and Malik kept them laminated in a binder, just in case. Cedar Hills could enjoy the view, but they couldn't tell him what to do with the water or the dock or the trail that looped around the north edge. Still, they acted like they could. Malik didn't bother them, and they hadn't really bothered him. Not yet. There were always glances. The occasional car that slowed down when he was out on his tractor. The passive-aggressive "you own all this?" questions. The neighborhood Facebook group, where someone once asked if non-residents were allowed to fish. He'd never even joined the group. His skin was enough of a membership denial. But Malik wasn't one to stir things up. He kept to himself. That was the deal. He wouldn't interfere with the HOA's lawn rule arguments and dog poop politics, and they'd pretend his ranch didn't exist. It worked. Mostly. Until the binoculars showed up. He first noticed them one Thursday evening as he lit the fire pit near the dock. He was hosting 2 brothers from Dallas, clients who had booked a lake weekend escape, on a new listing he'd quietly put up online. Malik had spent the last 2 months building a small guest yurt and clearing an access road through the trees. Nothing fancy, just private lake access, clean air, and a fire pit under the stars. It was legal, properly zoned, and outside HOA boundaries. The business was small, and the bookings came through word of mouth. But he'd also listed it on one major app just to see what happened. Apparently, someone saw. From across the lake, just past the trimmed hedges and perfectly aligned Adirondack chairs, a flicker of light caught Malik's eye. He turned. There, in the window of one of the lake-facing houses, binoculars. Just for a second. Then they disappeared behind lace curtains. He didn't need a name to know who it was. Judith Harper. Blonde, mid-50s, perfect posture, HOA board member. Everyone just called her Karen. Judith had once approached him during a roadside cleanup initiative, handing him a pair of gloves and asking if he lived around here. She'd recoiled slightly when he said, "Right over that ridge." Her smile had been plastic ever since. Malik shrugged and returned to his fire. He wasn't breaking any laws. He wasn't throwing parties. Just a quiet retreat. The guests were polite, paid well, and always left the place cleaner than they found it. Still, he couldn't shake the sense of something shifting. It wasn't the binoculars. Not just that. It was the vibe, like the land was being watched. Judged. Like his presence, tolerated for years in silence, was suddenly too visible, too real. Later that night, as the stars came out and the fire crackled, Malik stared into the flames and felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Not fear. Not quite anger. Just readiness. A soldier's instinct. He didn't know it yet, but the peace was about to end. Karen awakens. Saturday came with blue skies and a slow breeze. Malik was on the porch sharpening his mower blades when the sound of tires crunching gravel pulled his attention. A black and white cruiser rolled down the tree-lined drive, the red and blue lights off but unmistakable all the same. Malik stood slowly, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. The deputy stepped out young, maybe early 30s, sunburnt neck, polite but cautious. His nameplate read Reeves. "Morning, sir," he said, hand resting near his belt. "We received a call from a neighbor about possible unlicensed commercial activity on this property. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" Malik blinked once, took a slow sip from his thermos, and nodded toward the porch chairs. "You want coffee while we talk, or are you good?" Reeves chuckled nervously. "I'm good, sir. Thanks." The questions were soft at first, whether Malik was hosting guests, whether he was charging money, whether there was a party planned for the evening. "No parties," Malik said calmly. "One couple, down by the lake. Paid retreat. Legal zoning. County records will show it's R1 with permitted accessory use for recreational hosting. This lands outside HOA jurisdiction. Fully compliant." He handed over a laminated copy of the permit packet, the same one his lawyer had recommended he keep in reach. Reeves read through it, nodded. "This checks out. Honestly, I figured it would. Some folks just get jumpy when things change." Malik gave a thin smile. "Let me guess. Caller didn't give a name?" Reeves hesitated. "She asked to remain anonymous, but she did say she was on the HOA board."
"Of course she did."
Malik watched the cruiser drive off, leaving behind twin dust trails and a feeling he hadn't felt since patrol days in Kandahar, the sense that someone had quietly marked him. Later that evening, as Malik grilled catfish on the back patio, his phone buzzed. It was one of the neighborhood teens, Kayla, who worked part-time for him cleaning up between lake guests. She'd screenshotted a post from the Cedar Hills Estates Facebook group. "It's come to our attention that the lake is being turned into a commercial business, possibly bringing non-residents into the area. This could severely impact property values and neighborhood safety. Board members are addressing this urgently. Please keep an eye out for unfamiliar vehicles. Judith Harper, HOA Secretary." The post was vague enough to avoid legal trouble, but the intent was clear. Malik leaned against the porch rail, scrolling through the dozens of comments that followed. Some were neutral. A few echoed Judith's concerns. But others took a sharper tone. "Not the kind of crowd I want around my kids. Didn't we have rules for this sort of thing? I saw a group down there with loud music. This isn't a campsite." None of them had names attached. Just first names and blurred profile pics. But Malik knew. He had walked past these people at the co-op store, nodded at them in traffic. They had smiled, that tight, polite smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. He opened his own laptop, pulled up the zoning map, and dragged a digital line across the lake. His property ran solidly around 70% of the shoreline, including the dock, the fire pit zone, and the only natural trail down to the water. What they thought of as theirs had never legally belonged to them, but they had acted like it did. For years. The next morning brought more signs that peace was slipping. A faded green Ford SUV slowed down outside his gate. A woman leaned out and snapped photos of his new signage. Lake retreat parking, registered guests only. No one spoke. They just drove off again. Then came the letter, no envelope, just a folded sheet taped to his mailbox. "Dear Sir, we understand you may be unaware of community standards regarding property usage, noise control, and guest frequency. Please attend the next HOA board meeting to discuss alignment with our expectations." It wasn't signed, just stamped with the HOA logo at the top, as if it meant something. Malik snorted. They really thought this was a negotiation. He sat at his kitchen table, looking out at the lake. The sun was high now, and his guests were floating lazily in their kayaks, grinning and splashing like kids. It was peaceful, still beautiful, but something had changed. This wasn't a friendly misunderstanding. It was a pressure campaign. He'd seen it in other forms before: base politics, military cliques, subtle hostility dressed in professionalism. It was always the same. Push the outsider just enough, make them uncomfortable, remind them they don't fully belong. And in communities like this, a black man with land, peace, and ownership, that was a threat all on its own. Legal lines and power plays. The Crickets had barely started their evening song when Malik's phone lit up with a message from Tanya, his lawyer and longtime friend. Her text was short and sharp, just like she was. Confirmed. You're 100% in the clear. No HOA authority. Also, something interesting about that Karen woman's lot. Call me. Malik called her immediately. Tanya got straight to the point. Remember when you sent me the old deed from your grandfather? Turns out, back in '73, the county redrew the parcel lines when they paved the road. That cut-off triangle on the satellite image? That's part of your land. Karen's backyard fence sits 3 feet inside it. Malik let out a low whistle. You're saying she's encroaching? Technically?
Trespassing.
And if I dig further, I might find more. That was all Malik needed to hear. The gloves were off. The next few weeks passed slowly and strategically. Malik let the guests keep coming. He smiled at the patrol cars that drove by a little too often. He waved politely at neighbors who refused to wave back. And he watched, carefully, as the house across the lake, Judith Harper's, posted a tiny red "For Sale by Owner" sign in the window. It was tucked low, almost hidden. She hadn't posted about it online. She hadn't even mentioned it at the last HOA bulletin. Malik only found out because one of his lake guests, a former real estate agent, noticed it. Looks like she's trying to sell under the radar, the guest said casually as they loaded their cooler into the car. Probably trying to dodge seller disclosure paperwork. Smart, if she's got something to hide. Malik smiled. Or stupid. That night, he made a call. 3 weeks later, the deed was in his name. Judith's lot, bought through a quiet LLC, cash offer, no financing needed. Her agent never asked questions. Money talks and silent signs papers. Judith, now relocated to a condo across town, had no idea who the buyer was. She still came back to retrieve a few things: flower pots, patio chairs, her wind chimes, and glared at Malik's property like he'd poisoned the grass. He didn't wave, just watched. Then he called a contractor. It took 2 days to install the gate. 10 feet of powder-coated steel, complete with a keypad entry, security camera, and a large wooden sign that read, "Private access only, trespassers will be prosecuted. Authorized lake retreat guests only." The gate stood directly across the paved road that once led from Cedar Hills Estates to the lake trail, the only smooth access point for golf carts, strollers, or HOA events. Now, it ended at a fence, a lock, and a very clear boundary. Within hours, his inbox lit up. One email from the HOA president, asking for a friendly conversation. One voicemail from an angry local mom. "Our kids used that trail for years. You can't just block it." And one passive-aggressive message in his mailbox, and signed again. "This isn't neighborly. Please reconsider the consequences of your actions." Malik chuckled and fed the note to his burn barrel. Behind the scenes, he worked with Tanya to file a formal boundary notice with the county. He submitted paperwork to document the prior trespass on the edge of Judith's former property and posted reflective markers every 100 feet. Dawson Ranch, private land. No HOA access. Still, the HOA board tried to fight back. They threatened a lawsuit. Tanya shut it down with zoning maps and signed affidavits. They tried to organize a community vote to reclaim access. Malik posted a large QR code on the gate that linked to the original 1973 land survey, complete with legal signatures and county stamps. They even tried to claim he was violating the community spirit. Malik posted a new sign next to the gate. Community spirit isn't a legal right. Land ownership is. On a warm Thursday, Malik hosted a barbecue for his guests and invited a few local landowners, mostly older Black and Hispanic families who had held onto their property through decades of pressure, taxes, and gentrification. He grilled brisket, passed out cold beers, and showed them the maps. You all ever had trouble with Cedar Hills? He asked. Everyone nodded. One man laughed. They once tried to fine me for parking my tractor too close to the view line. Said it ruined their lakeside experience. Malik raised his glass. Not anymore. That night, the music played softly by the lake. Laughter floated across the water, and Malik sat at the edge of the dock, boots off, toes skimming the surface. It wasn't revenge he felt. It was balance. The kind of peace that comes not from avoiding conflict, but from winning it clean and quiet. Access denied. Sunday morning came with a quiet kind of satisfaction. The air smelled like cedar and damp soil, and the sun glinted off the surface of Lake Dawson like a polished coin. Malik stood by the new gate, sipping coffee from his tin mug, watching a pickup truck slow to a stop just outside the fence. Judith Harper stepped out. She wore designer sunglasses, a wide-brimmed sun hat, and a face full of irritation. A younger man, likely her nephew or a hired hand, climbed out after her and approached the keypad. "Excuse me," Judith called out in her too loud voice. "We're just retrieving some patio items from the shed by the lake. That lot may be sold, but I'm entitled to pick up my things." Malik didn't move. "That shed's been demolished. Your lot transfer cleared weeks ago, along with everything listed in the disclosure. Anything not removed before closing became property of the buyer." Judith's lips tightened. "I never agreed to this. You can't just block the whole neighborhood from the lake." "I didn't block the neighborhood," Malik said calmly. "I blocked trespassers. Legal difference." She moved closer, eyes sharp behind her glasses. "This is about race, isn't it? You think we don't want you here?" Malik raised an eyebrow. "You don't want me here. That much was clear when you called the cops on me for running a legal business on my own land."
She scoffed.
"That lake belongs to the community." He stepped aside and pointed at the laminated county map bolted next to the gate. The bold red outline showed Lake Dawson, firmly within Malik's property lines. The community never owned it. "You just assumed I wouldn't challenge that assumption." Judith stared at the sign, lips pressed into a thin, angry line. She turned without another word, climbed back into her SUV, and slammed the door. The tires kicked up dust as she drove away. Malik didn't watch her go. He just walked back to his porch, where his German shepherd, Duke, lounged in the shade, tail thumping lazily against the boards. A few days later, the HOA issued a desperate community-wide letter proposing a partnership initiative with Malik, offering to pay a small annual maintenance fee in exchange for seasonal access to the lake. Malik declined. Instead, he posted a revised rate for HOA residents wishing to use the lake, $1,000 per event, subject to availability, with background checks for all guests. Non-negotiable. The silence after that was almost louder than the complaints had ever been. Summer arrived in full, and with it came new bookings. College students, retired couples, solo travelers, all drawn by the promise of clean water, open skies, and absolute quiet. Malik upgraded the trail system, added solar lanterns, and brought in a local artist to paint a mural on the dock house, a black cowboy in silhouette holding a fishing pole under a galaxy of stars. Word of the retreat spread. It made local blogs, then regional ones. Soon, Malik had a waiting list 2 months long. Meanwhile, the HOA's lakeside homes began to suffer. Without trail access, the lakefront premium disappeared. Property values dipped slightly, not enough to crash the neighborhood, but enough to get whispers going at HOA meetings. One board member resigned. Another put their house up for sale. On the 4th of July, Malik hosted his biggest event yet, a community barbecue for local landowners, friends, veterans, and the teens who had helped build the retreat from the ground up. Folding tables held racks of ribs, trays of cornbread, smoked corn, and sweet tea in mason jars. Kids ran around with sparklers, and old-timers played dominoes under the big oak tree. As dusk settled in, lanterns flickered on along the trail, and Malik walked down to the dock, where a small jazz trio was setting up. Across the lake, the HOA homes sat dark and silent. No fireworks, no laughter, Just glass windows watching the party they hadn't been invited to.
He liked it that way.
Later that night, after the last guest had gone and the last coal had cooled, Malik stood alone at the edge of the lake. Fireflies blinked in the reeds. Frogs croaked lazily. The moon sat high, casting silver across the water. Duke padded up beside him and sat down with a huff. Malik took a deep breath. This was what his grandfather had fought for. Land, legacy, and the ability to live without begging permission. Not peace bought by silence, but earned through resistance. He'd never wanted to be the center of anything. But if defending his land, his guests, and his dignity made him a problem, then he'd be the problem with a deed in one hand and a grill fork in the other.